Welcome to the Onyx Report, a program that critically analyzes the experiences, histories, and perceptions of black males in American society. I'm Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Fresno State, black male advocate, and black male studies scholar. In the program, we examine current events while engaging concepts ranging from institutionalized anti-black misandry to gynocentrism from a black masculinist perspective. Our goal is to remind people of black men's humanity. Call in after a half hour to the show at 310-928-7733. All right. Welcome, people, back to the Onyx Report. We just took a little break earlier this month, had to attend some beginning of the year on-campus events, but we are back in action. Good to be back. Greetings for those who are coming in through Interlight Radio directly, those who are coming through my website, and it is a newly updated website, so keep an eye on it at thhasanjohnson.com. And those who are coming through YouTube, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and support the channel. We are back this week, September 18th, talking a little bit about some of the things that are in the news, some of the not so overt things that may be happening. And of course, we have a special guest that I will introduce in a moment. As you all know, I like to kind of start with just some blurbs from the news that relate to black men in one way, shape, or form, and may or may not come up in the course of the conversation or if anyone calls in. But I'd like to kind of give a frame, or at least give some sense of what's going on in the world when the show comes on, some of the things that hit. So some of you who are on my Facebook or Twitter accounts may see some of the things I posted, and you probably be familiar with some of the things I'm about to mention. The first thing I wanted to bring up is one of the latest articles from Newsweek.com that talks about black identity extremism and relates it, in fact, says it's more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. This relates to black men in particular because, to my knowledge, the only person arrested as a black identity extremist was a Texas man named Rakim Balagan. And so in that, it kind of gives us a sense of how black identity extremism is being defined. And so far, that definition seems to apply to justifying politicized black males' incarceration and or death. On another note, we have a case of hair discrimination to a young Texas boy. You can find this on www.wapt.com. Look up the article, "School Official Says Boy's Hair Doesn't Follow Dress Code and He Must Cut It or Wear Dress." Now, I bring this up because I've been told directly that black men and boys don't experience hair discrimination of any sort. And so I've done a blog piece about this, ranging from everything from beards to hair, and the ways in which black males have experienced this going back generations, especially in the workplace. So that these cases are still coming up is important. Also, an article in NBC News on black unemployment that kind of shows us the black unemployment rate has fallen to 5.5%. Saying that this is negative development for black citizens, but it does not go into detail about black men in particular, whose unemployment rates range from 40 to 50% in over 35 major cities. So the experience of unemployment in regard to black men takes on a whole new dimension when we go through the research a little bit. So just to kind of put that on the table. And there's never enough time to cover all of these cases, but I try to shine some light on some of them. There's a case in Las Vegas of a black male who was stopped by police over a bike light and died in custody. Less than an hour after being stopped, he was taken to the ground, handcuffed, and told the officers that he couldn't breathe, much like Eric Gardner, and he still nonetheless passed. Another case to look at, drug convictions overturned for 10 black men framed by Chicago Police Sergeant Ronald Watts. This would lead to 63 exonerations just at the hands of one police officer. So you can imagine, if this is happening across the country, how many black men have been incarcerated or killed behind charges that were erroneous from the beginning. So a case to look at, that's on blackmainstreet.net. Also, we have a case of a young woman who apparently in Pleasant Grove, Alabama, Ashley Mack, 33 years old, is charged with second-degree arson, third-degree burglary for burning down her ex-boyfriend's house. He apparently broke up with her, and she decided to burn down his home. So that is the second case that I've read like that in the last two shows, and that may warrant some dialogue as far as that. Lastly, California State Assembly unanimously passes bill to allow college athletes to profit from endorsements. This, of course, directly impacts black males who are in college and playing sports. Often are the means by which universities raise a great deal of funds, but up to now have not been able to really legally benefit from their efforts. Now, again, that might come up later in the discussion, but it just gives me a chance to kind of frame what black male life looks like in some capacity. I'm by no means suggesting that that list of articles is exhaustive, but merely to kind of give you a frame of the kind of things that I see happening and that black men endure. To discuss black men in more detail in relation to his work, I'm happy to introduce on the Onyx report Dr. Stephen Kniffley, scholar who received a certificate in strategic healthcare from Cornell University in 2018. 2017, had his master's in public administration from Wright State University. 2013, had his PsyD from Spalding University. Master's in clinical psychology from Spalding in 2010, and a BS in psychology in 2008 at the University of Louisville. He's currently teaching at Spalding University in the School of Professional Psychology, and if I'm not mistaken, is Associate Director of the Center for Behavioral Health. The brother is quite prolific. He has several texts. It looks like at least two that might be in press at the moment: Black Males in the Criminal Justice System, and extended case studies in program evaluation, designing and implementing effective evaluations. His 2017 text, Out of KOS, Knowledge of Self, Black Masculinity, Psychopathology and Treatment. His 2014 text, Knowledge of Self, Understanding the Mind of the Black Male, and his 2013 text, The Black Man's Guide to Graduate School. He also has a very prominent blog that I'm going to read some pieces off of later, some titles that I think will definitely intrigue you, and did a brilliant TED Talk with Julie L. Williams entitled Meeting in the Middle in 2017. So I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Kniffley, to the Onyx Report. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, thank you for coming, man. As people know at this point, what I like to do is showcase people who have prioritized in their work the lives of black men and boys and seek to humanize them, or at least I should say engage them as human beings, where we don't take on myth as the primary motivation for our explanations and modes of analyses, and we look to actually explore what's going on in the lives of black males, not engaging them as monsters or stereotypes, but as human beings. This is how I roughly define black masculinism as it pertains to research. You know, how do we actually engage in research that is done from a humanistic standpoint? And by that logic, I've asked you to be on the show because I see your work as positioning you as that type of person. Am I incorrect, or how would you frame person? Am I incorrect, or how would you frame that?
I certainly do place at the center of my research and my clinical work the lived experience of black males.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I would like to do is actually learn a little bit about you, because I want to showcase your work, and I want people to know, you know, what you're doing, but I also want them to understand why. If you could tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how, if at all, it contributed to your research and where you decided to take that.
Sure. My lived experience most certainly influenced the person that I am now, as well as my motivation to do the things that I'm doing in terms of my scholarship and my clinical practice. So I was raised in a single parent home. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old. From that time on until I left my mother's home, I was considered the man of the house, which meant that I was oftentimes responsible for my brother and his upbringing and making sure that everything was okay with him. And so there was this kind of pseudo promotion that happened within my home, to where I wasn't necessarily a child, but also wasn't a man per se, but was still trying to balance both roles at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a space where black males weren't oftentimes celebrated and weren't necessarily seen as successful. And so that really limited my perception of what I could be, especially as a youth. I just assumed, similar to many of my cousins and many other people that were around me, that the only space that I could exist in was in the sports or entertainment field. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so because of that, I didn't put forth all the effort that I could have in terms of my studies. I actually got very lucky getting into the University of Louisville specifically because I actually didn't apply to school
Mm-hmm.
until the Friday before school started. And I just got lucky enough that someone had faith in me and was willing to invest in me to give me a scholarship and to admit me into the University of Louisville. But because I was still carrying those narratives around what my options were, what my choices were as a black man and as a black male, I didn't put forth my full effort still because I still had no reference for what academic success looked like for black males because it wasn't something that I saw often in my space, and so I actually ended up losing that scholarship.
Now
Uh,
let me catch up to you a minute. Now, where are you from?
so I say I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, because that's the place that I've lived the
Mm,
longest.
okay.
But when you live in poverty and do all those types of things, you move around a lot, and
Right,
so
right.
I've lived all over the Midwest for the most part, and ended up going to high school in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, okay, okay. And so you were also an athlete. Is that correct?
I played football and track in
I
high
see.
school.
And did did mentorship or relationships with other black men help with that process, especially as you transition into higher education? Because I want you to continue your story. I just kind of wanted to
Sure.
get some things in there because I saw this post or this article earlier today about Allen Iverson crediting Coach John Thompson for saving his life. And I know
Mhm.
me myself, I can say the same thing as far as my academic work. I had no plans to be an academic until I met Dr. William Little, who was chair of Africana Studies at Dominguez Hills, and he was the first, professor teacher I'd ever had that not only saw potential in me, but saw graduate potential.
Mhm.
And whereas I was planning to just, go find any work I could, he literally grabbed me by the neck and he had to explain what graduate school was. So that's how little I'd prepared. I was about to graduate undergrad and still didn't really know much about graduate school. And he had to snatch me, walk me through it, and push me in it. And the next thing I knew, because of him, I was doing a master's. Did any type of mentorship or support like that help you in that period of your life?
I met my first black male doctor of any kind my sophomore year of college.
Mm.
And he was a psychologist. And I searched for that man and hunted him down and said that he was going to be my mentor. And he was the one that helped. I know I did. If I really want something, I'm going to go for it because that's just kind of how I am as a person.
Hmm.
Uh, and he set me on the direction. He opened the path to let me know that psychology and being a psychologist was something that I could accomplish as a black man because there just isn't a lot of psychologists in our field that are black males. About 0.5% of all psychologists are black males. And so the statistical probability of meeting someone like him in the same city was improbable. And so we
Mm.
were meant to be in that space, and he was meant to be there to mentor me and to show me what I could be.
Okay. And this was now you mentioned that you kind of fell short in terms of academic study. Where was this in the time frame?
Sure. So this was my freshman year of college.
Hmm.
You needed to maintain a certain GPA in order to keep your full ride to U of L, and I was well below that. It actually ended up having to reapply for that scholarship, and for my sophomore year was only given half of it, and so I had
Mm.
to work to come up with the other half. And then once I, regained it, I was off to the races. I, maintained a 3.5 GPA for the rest of my time there.
Hmm.
But really, it was a combination of surrounding myself with these black male role models, because like I really immersed myself in finding these guys my sophomore year, running into Dr. Chapman, who is the psychologist that I'm referring to, that really kind of put me on this trajectory to say that I could do something different, that this is a path that I could see moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, graduate school, what made you decide to go? What really made you decide to do this type of research? And tell us more. Tell us actually what type of research you do.
Sure. So my area of research falls into three main buckets at this point, because I believe in the power of three. And so it's black males and mental health, black males in the criminal justice system, and black males in the treatment of racial trauma. And so I'm always trying to find ways to produce research and to engage in clinical work in those areas. How I fell into this field of psychology, I worked at a foster home, a group home, as part of my senior and first year of graduate school. And what I noticed is that many of the kids there were black males. You know, this was a foster home. This was a group home where the kids ranged from, 10 to 12 years old at least the unit that I was working at. And black males learn how to be black males in relation to others. And what I found for a lot of these young men is that they had no one to relate to, and so they were really hungry just to see someone that looked like them, that presumably was doing something positive. And so oftentimes they would ask me if I could take them home, if I could be some sort of mentor for them, and all those things. But I was a young guy at that time. I was still trying to figure out life for myself, and I definitely couldn't fit 20 kids into my 500 square foot apartment. It just wasn't going to work.
Right.
And so, and what I realized also is that these kids have been traumatized. These kids were carrying around heavy experiences that they had no one to talk to because no one knew how to relate to them. And so I decided at that point that I needed to go back to school in order to develop the skills needed to help them, and that I needed to focus my efforts on the healing process, because one of the things I noticed about these young men is one of the reasons why they were hurting was also because they saw limited choices and options for what their black masculinity expression could look like. They just assumed that society had told them that they were dumb, deviant, and dangerous, and that that's all that they could be. And I was trying to find my best way to communicate that they could do something different, that they had options for flexibility and choice. But I lacked the words and skills to be able to offer that. And so I knew I needed to go to graduate school to get that training.
And that is so many black men's experiences that I've talked to that have gone into teaching, gone into counseling, gone into administrative work at schools where they're still helping and working with kids. It's the same kind of dynamic. I mean, I know even for me, I lived in Philadelphia for a while, and I worked at a nonprofit there, and my job was basically teaching a GED class for 14 to 17-year-old black males who were court ordered to be there. And these were some of the roughest dudes you can meet at that age range. And yet once you got to know them, or once I got to know them, they were asking me the same kind of things. You know, could they go home with me? You know, because they had no other support mechanisms. And the stories that they would tell were just heart-wrenching. I mean, I had one young man he was 14, and he was taking care of his mother, who was bedridden with AIDS, and he was the only one doing it and couldn't find any support. Other young men in that program, at least a few of them, had been sexually violated by men and women and had no one to talk to. You know, I actually taught in Compton Unified School District for a few years as well before I started my doctorate, and it was the same kind of dynamic. And so, you know, what you're saying about the presence of black men, especially when it comes to working with boys, it's so imperative that they actually be able to see themselves in you and have somebody willing to sit down with them, because that's not a common thing. It's not, and it wasn't in my education either. So that's incredibly poignant. How did that shape what you decided to end up doing?
Well, I realized that I needed to go where the need was. Even in my own graduate training, when I would talk with my colleagues, or even when I'm working with folks now The only time that folks ever want to intersect with the black male experience and to seek to be a part of the healing process is when they're criminally justice involved. And that's
Mm,
certainly a place where we need to be. But there are black males that are out there that are not affiliated with that system that could use our help as well.
hmm
And so it's problematic to me to think that the only time that we're willing to work with black males is when they're in cages. So
mm.
I wanted to do something different from that.
Well, tell me, did you have any challenges when you decided, okay, I'm going to do this work with and for and on black males? What kind of challenges, if any, did you face?
Well, it's a lonely field. There's not a lot of black male psychologists out there, and so that means that there's not a lot of black people or just people in general that are focusing on understanding the black lived experience, the black male lived experience, and how we can use that as a method to enhance their mental health, enhance their well-being, and all of those things. And so what ends up happening is that resources oftentimes aren't there, or there's this feeling of being overwhelmed
Mm,
because there's no one else doing the work, and so they have to come to you. But if you're the only person, then that poses a challenge because you can't treat, you can't research, you can't do it all,
right.
even if the expectation is that you can.
No, and that's real. That definitely, and that happens on university campuses as well, where black faculty have a difficult time keeping up in terms of publications and other types of requirements because they're doing so much off the clock work with black students, especially black male students who may be, real far behind in terms of being in the environment they're in. So that definitely has an impact. What Now, you also do therapy or conduct therapy, is that true? Or how does that work?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Okay. What are you finding that the black males that you work with, what kinds of issues do you tend to see at the forefront more often?
Sure. So I'm a child psychologist by training, and so the young men and males that I've worked with, it oftentimes is it's an onion process, if you will. All the black males that are referred to me or have been referred to me have all been referred for anger issues,
Mm,
and I believe that anger is a secondary emotion, which means that there's always something underneath that needs to be touched and addressed.
mm-hmm.
Um, but no one is willing to take the time to look past the anger and to see the sadness or the anxiety or the grief or the loneliness or these other emotions that these young men and males are experiencing. And so part of my work is to help them to kind of go beneath the surface and explore those emotions that are oftentimes not safe for
Mm.
them to express out in the world. A black man they can't be sad. And if they are angry, it's a double-edged sword because it's expected of them, but it can also lead to their demise as well.
Can you expound on that?
Sure. So on the football field, you are rewarded for being as physically aggressive as you can be. I
Mm,
remember when I was playing football, the intent was to lay that man out, right?
mm-hmm.
You would get kudos if you knocked the wind out of somebody. That was what you intended to do.
Mm-hmm.
But society has said that we expect that same type of behavior all the time for you because we see you as this dangerous, scary black man. But we're only going to reward you in this space in terms of the football field or some sports arena in order for that to happen. However, there's spaces in life where we then perceive the same type of behaviors from black males in other spaces and then punish them because of that. If I think about the school system, for example, black boys and black males are overrepresented in all aspects of the disciplinary process. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that has to do with how they perceive one's aggressive or assertive nature.
Mm-hmm.
So in one space, a black male is rewarded for being aggressive. In another space, even if he isn't being aggressive, it's seen as such, and then he's punished because of that, which leads
Absolutely.
to this confusing existence for a lot of our black males.
Mm-hmm. And no, definitely. In my work, I refer to what I call the promotion demotion thesis, and it has to do with the ways black males are perceived in K through 12. And what I've found in that dynamic is that you're absolutely right. They're rewarded in very key contexts, gladiator contexts where, their aggressiveness is supported and really almost kind of profited off of, depending on the type of institution they're in. But when it comes to the classroom, there's an entirely different dynamic, and they are overwhelmingly pushed into special education over behavioral issues, not even academic performance.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And it tends to be the black males that can code switch that manage to continue on. But if not, we tend to find black males, especially if they're not in athletics, demoted or pushed out of the school system altogether. And so I that process in and of itself impacts really their permanent life chances, their permanent life opportunities, just in that K through 12 dynamic. I tell people this quite readily. My son, in his second week of kindergarten, they tried to put him into special education simply on the basis of his behavior. And then, when I didn't allow for it, within the next 2 years, he was the top two, one of the top two students in each class he was in, first and second grade and beyond. But without someone to advocate for him, at the hands of teachers who see him as nothing more than a stereotype, we see where that kind of goes. Now, you deal with psychopathology in your work. Is that what it is?
Yes. So just mental health issues. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the mental health issues that you write about most frequently? Psychopathology being one, and some of the others. What are you finding?
So specifically in my work with black males, the three main issues that are coming up for our young men and males relate to depression, anxiety, and the experience of racial trauma. Those are kind of the three mental health areas that I focus on, because that's what I believe is underneath all of this aggressive, anger-related things that folks are perceiving from our young men and males, is that they are really just sad and anxious about the world that they live in. They are depressed because society has told them that there's only certain ways that they could be in the world. Mm-hmm. But then I'll sometimes see these examples and wonder if there's more that they're supposed to be doing and more that they're supposed to be capable of. And then there's anxiety that black males face because they are forced, they are told that they must endorse all these aggressive ways of being in the world, but also knowing that comes at a cost. And so there's anxiety around the conflict that those young folks experience, knowing that they feel like they have to do these things, but knowing that there's a high cost associated with it.
Wow. Well, in the field of psychology, we know there's a long history in regard to how black people in general and black males in particular have been perceived. How has that history, whether we're talking about experimentation on black males, whether we're talking about purposeful misdiagnosis, that history in and of itself, how has that affected you working in that field in trying to help people?
Sure. So if we could take it all the way back to 1853, when Samuel Cartwright came out with his diagnosis of drapetomania, which essentially referred to this intense desire to be free because they couldn't explain why all these slaves just wanted to run away from the plantation. They just thought that these folks should be happy and all of that. And so from the 1850s on, there's been this constant pathologizing of the black experience, specifically the black male experience in this context, from drapetomania to protest psychosis, all these things where black folks have been attempting to fight for their rights, to have their humanity seen, has been pathologized in a lot of ways. And so my goal in my work is to help black folks to see their humanity and to know that won't be pathologized in the space. I had an opportunity to go to South Africa, and one of the greetings that folks from the Zulu people offer each other is something called sawubona. And what sawubona means is that I see you. And
Mm-hmm.
so whenever folks greet each other over there, they're acknowledging each other's humanity and their right to exist in the space. And so whenever I'm working with Black males in therapy, I'm also trying to find ways for them to recognize their humanity and for them to know that I see their humanity in the space and will offer that solid bona concept to them.
Mm-hmm. And when you employed that, did you notice a difference in the response?
Yeah, so folks that are oftentimes described as resistant or conduct disordered or having behavioral challenges or things like that respond different when you say, I see you as a human being.
Mm.
That leads to a different perception that they have of themselves, and they also the perception that they have of folks that look like them as well.
And you're talking about something in terms of not being perceived as a human being that can seem all encompassing, whether you're talking about media, whether you're even talking about the environment within families where black males are either not perceived or treated or made to feel like they're not even a part of the human experience. That becomes so pervasive and it's reinforced in so many areas that I'm curious more about what the long-term impact of that is. And one of the things I notice with the students I work with is, with black males, there's an idea that they're not going to be helped and they stop seeking it out. And I know I'm guilty of this myself, and sometimes in very casual everyday situations. Like, for example, I got a speeding ticket not long ago, and a colleague of mine, she was saying that, oh yeah, well, when I get pulled over, I at least talk to them and see if I can talk my way out of it. And she, told me she talked her way out of a few tickets. It never crossed my mind to ask to not be ticketed, to ask to be perceived differently or given a break. It never crossed my mind to do so. And when I've tried it, it's never worked. So I'm curious about, with this kind of pervasive inhumanity that can affect micro, situations or macro situations, how do you apply Sawubona to that? And are you trying to find ways to spread that treatment so that it's reinforced in other areas that people engage in?
Yeah, so I think at the most basic level, our first goal is always to help black males to rediscover their own humanity. I mean, if you look on the media, you look on TV, there's constant displays of black masculinity that's very limited in nature, that says that, you can only exist as a black male in this box. And so the first thing I'm always trying to do with the black males that I work with is to say that box is a fallacy. It's not something that you necessarily have to exist in. It's paper lines that you can step out of if you so choose. And by choosing that, you reclaim the humanity that's been taken from you in a lot of ways. And so that's part of the work that we do, is to really help folks to rediscover that humanity that has always been a part of who they are, but has been taken away from them in various contexts, from their freedom, from their perception of themselves and the folks that look like them, from the perception that they have of their capabilities in terms of being able to do things other than sports and entertainment, just being able to just do more and to have more choices. As a child psychologist, one of the things that we teach parents is this idea of forced choice, because when you're working with kids have a really hard time making decisions about things. And so you could be standing in line all day trying to get a kid to decide if he wants a Snickers or a Milky Way. But what you can do is you can say either you can have this one or you can have this one. And so black males have also experienced that too at the higher social level, where folks have said either you could be this type of black male or you could be this type of black male. And that's problematic, because that's limiting their humanity already.
Absolutely. And it again, if it's reinforced in different areas over long periods of time, it definitely must have a cumulative effect. Is that so?
Yes, that's so. Some stats that really stand out to me are around the rates of suicide for black males and the rates of depression for black males. So suicide is now a third leading cause of death for black males between the ages of 15 and 24.
Mm.
There was a study that was done that examined the last 1,500 deaths by suicide for kids ages 6 to 12. And what they found is that 36% of those were black males.
Mm.
The rate of depression for black males has quadrupled in the last 20 years. And so we're experiencing a lot of black males in this day and age that are depressed, sad, hopeless, and feel like there's no other way to continue living their lives and then thus end them. And so, like, I think that's the cumulative effect of constantly having your humanity questioned and your experience as a black man denied.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to mention a few of the things that you are working on and kind of get your insight on that. Now, first, one of the things I was really, happy to see, you did your dissertation work on black males. I mean, the title of your dissertation was Ethnic Racial Identity Development and Its Effect on Psychological Well-Being in African American Males. And from there, I mentioned a number of the texts that you've written. I'm particularly intrigued by the guide to graduate school. I wish you'd have wrote that in 2000. I could have benefited from that one. So I don't know why you took so long, but I appreciate that you did it. But also, you have a blog on your website. Your website is drstephenkniffleyjr.com. And on the blog, there are a couple that you have some blog entries that I think are intriguing. I'm only going to read a few, but I wanted people to get a feel for the kind of work you're doing. So one is how to encourage black males to go to therapy. Top 10 affirmations black males need to hear daily. Raising black sons. The top 4 challenges facing black males in the criminal justice system. The top 4 challenges facing black males, period. 3 things to know about black males and suicide. Top 3 reasons black people should go to therapy. And then the top 5 reasons black people don't go to therapy. What led you to start the blog, and what is kind of guiding why you do it?
So I believe that one of the ways that we can reclaim black male humanity is by offering a different narrative and then equipping those folks that love black males with the tools that they need to be able to have these challenging conversations with those black males that are in their lives. And so I felt like I needed to create a space where we could have that dialogue, where we could talk about those challenging things related to why don't black males go to therapy? What are some things that black males need from us? What are the challenges that black males are facing from the psychological perspective? Because oftentimes we kind of have a general idea of maybe what the challenges are, but we don't have like the specific nuances to really like highlight, well, what are the specific challenges that those folks are facing? And then also thinking through, well, what do I say to a black male that's experiencing these things? I think that's also been a part of the conversation that's been missing, is that I, as a person that loves black men, that wants to see them be successful, how do I communicate that to them, and what things do I offer them in terms of support, skills, affirmations, etc. And so I wanted to create a space where we were able to do that for black men and for black males.
And that's incredibly important, because one of the things that people don't recognize is that definitions of black manhood change over time. And the expectations, the social expectations, also change. And many of those expectations are not necessarily authored by black men. So if we talk about, say, the baby boomer generation, or even the greatest generation, the idea of black manhood at that time, especially in regard to the family, was far more around provisioning, right? Around playing certain roles that support the family. But, really after the 1970s and especially the 1980s, the expectation is now a certain type of emotional presence, a certain type of engagement. Now, with that, there's an assumption that, black males are making this transition, but these are often expectations imposed from outside. They're not necessarily authored by black men themselves. And so black men are engaged, they're expected to do things, and many are, but there's this shift in that expectation. And these expectations continue to shift over time. Now, some of the deep-seated expectations that are materially based about what roles black men should be able to, provide in a family really come up under scrutiny when you look at some of the data I've even already mentioned in terms of unemployment. you got rates of 40 to 50% unemployment in over 35 major cities. Performances of, provisioning take on a whole new meaning. So with that in mind about how expectations change, what is it that you recommend first for people who have expectations of black men? And then secondly, what do you say to black men themselves who are grappling with trying to keep up with these different definitions?
Sure. So I guess the folks that are thinking through these expectations, it's always helpful to critically analyze, well, where did these expectations come from? Is this within a community or is it without? And then is this an expectation that comes with skills and abilities? Is there some sort of training, some sort of experience that black males are getting that helps them to achieve and accomplish these roles? You can't expect folks to accomplish building a house with no tools. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of what we're offering to black males, is that they need to be in these certain spaces, act in these certain ways, but we're not giving them the tools that they need in order to do that. And what I would offer to black males specifically is be able to say, to validate and affirm how much difficult that must be to have these expectations, but then to know, but then to offer up that it makes sense that you're struggling with these things because no one is giving you the tools or the skills in order to accomplish these roles. If you're expected to be the provider in your home, but no one is giving you job training, you have all these educational cards that are stacked against you, all those types of things. It must be very challenging to accomplish that. And so just kind of knowing those things.
And as far as outside expectations from others, is that something that you hear about in your research or hear about when you're actually engaging black males? Is the social pressure of meeting those expectations?
Yeah, so I just had a conversation with some folks today where they were talking about some young males that are involved in selling drugs. And one of the things that that the guy said is that, well, people expect us to provide in our homes, and this is the only way that I know how to. And so either you have to give me different ways that will help to meet the needs of my family, or get out of my way and allow me to do the things I need to do in order to provide. And until we offer up some alternative perspectives, it makes sense why young men and males would go those routes.
For practical reasons. We actually we have a caller. So caller, please state your name and tell us where you're from.
Rosa Campson, and I'm from Detroit. Okay. And I have two questions. The first question is, a lot of our children that attend public school and receive information on history really don't receive good information about the history of Africa, let alone the history of African Americans. In your interactions with our young boys and I guess adolescent boys, what role does introducing them to their history play in your interactions? And my second question is, I know that most universities where we matriculate to obtain a master's or any degree, PhD, what have you, do not address the issue of how do you interact with African Americans that's relevant to African Americans. I'm in the health field, and I'm fully aware of this total lack of information that universities are well known for. There are clear differences not only in the mental issues that one would encounter among African Americans, but health issues as well.
Okay.
So my question is, what are you doing to reach out to other Black therapists that are working with our children? Is there an organization that you founded or you belong to? Because a lot of professionals, black professionals, need to be educated themselves in terms of these issues that you're discussing. And they need also the skills and the knowledge given to them as to how they approach it and address it so beautifully like you're doing currently. Thank you.
Two excellent questions. Thank you. We'll answer them off the air. But go ahead, Dr. Kniffley. Tell us what you think.
Sure. In regards to the first question, I think it's always helpful to remember, and this is something that folks should always call me out on and call us all out on, is when we start referring to Black history from slavery on. Like that's our first mistake, is that we forget that, there was a whole history that happened for us prior to us being slaves here in America. And that's something that we need to embrace and address. Folks that are Pan-African in nature, that's part of their philosophy. Folks that take the African-centered, Afrocentric perspective, that's part of their philosophy as well. And so I think the first thing that we could do is just say that there was an entire continent of things that were going on that influenced world politics, world mathematics, world science for generations that we don't talk about. Because if we just start with slavery here in America as the genesis of our experience as Black people, we're already starting out in a slave mindset. That's never a really helpful place for us to be, because it's much harder to get out of that instead of realizing that we were people that were doing great things that then just happened to become slaves, and that there was an intentional process since then to keep us in that posture since our time here in America. In regards to the second question, there's an organization called the Association of Black Psychologists, ABPSI, that is rooted in all things African-centered when it comes to psychology. It certainly will be a great space for folks to continue to have and have been having these types of conversations for at least the last 50 or 60 years or so at this point, when it comes to the intersection between Black folks in psychology. So ABPSI is definitely an organization I would encourage you to check out.
Okay, so you're active in ABPSI?
Yeah, well, yes. So I'm a member there, but I've spent more of my time on the other side, because I believe that you got to get in and make a difference where there's less of you, where you can have influence. Okay. So I actually spend more of my time the American Psychological Association, but I definitely recommend ABPSI as an alternative to that.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm an advocate of participating in organizations, especially from graduate school on, because there's so much that you often will not get operating in a field without that connection. Going through, particularly a Black organization in the field of study you're engaged in, there's usually an entire history there that you often don't get taught about in the classroom. So
this is exactly right.
I'm really glad the sister asked that question. It's a powerful one. You have a piece on your blog entitled "Goals for Raising Black Sons," and in it you lay out the goals, you lay out the challenges, the opportunities, the focus, and then you give tools for how to go about it. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Not only the piece itself, but the overarching philosophy around raising sons and where your work came in regard to that.
Yeah, so I'm a product of a single parent home, and many of the young men that I work with are products of single parent homes as well. And the challenges that I experience from the mothers and the grandmothers and the great grandmothers that I work with is, well, how do I raise this son in this space where he's constantly being dehumanized, where he's oftentimes told that he's less than, that he's always encouraged to stay within that dumb, deviant, and dangerous context. What tools do I give him? What affirmation do I give him to let him know that he can be more than what society is telling him that he can be? And then how do I combat that, knowing that Black men learn how to be Black men from other Black men more so than from Black women?
Mm-hmm.
And so, offering tools for those folks, and then also just for the men that have stepped up to assume the role of mentor, or someone that can be of help to the black men and males that don't have father figures in their lives. And
Okay, so
so
you're talking
really,
about everything from like coaches to stepfathers.
uh-huh.
Okay.
Yes. And so, but not all of us have kids, and not all of us are equipped with the tools. Even though I would argue that being a black man and talking with other black males is a meaningful enough experience in and of itself. But I wrote that piece to give folks the language that they could use to better understand the challenges that their sons are facing as they walk out the door, when they turn on the TV, when they listen to music, when they're reading their schoolwork, when they're doing all of those things. What are some of the challenges that they're facing? But because I always take a very strengths approach, I always want to talk about what are the strengths that our black males are walking around with that we can capitalize on in order for them to realize the fullest of their humanity.
Mm. Now, I'd like to ask a generational question. We only have about 8 minutes left, but generationally speaking, one of the things that we're seeing, particular to Generation X and millennials, but more so with millennials and Generation Z, I guess they're calling it, is what young black males are doing with their time. So if we talked about, say, video games, for example, what does that bring up for you as a professional psychologist, dealing with children to adolescents who are engaging in activities that some believe completely withdraw them from social dynamics? Is that something you've seen? And if so, how do you engage that?
Yeah, so if we've told black males and they've received enough reinforcement to suggest that being aggressive, that exhibiting their emotions is unsafe for them, then they're going to withdraw, right? They're going to withdraw in spaces where they can create worlds, where they can be human, where they can express themselves however they want to, where they can be their fullest selves based on the context. And so that's what we're seeing a lot of, is that folks are withdrawn into these spaces to where they can construct a reality that they see as perhaps better than the world one that exists out here in society. It's better for me to be in a place where I feel in control, where I feel like I have power, than to exist in a space where I don't feel like I have control, and I don't have power.
So it's not just a withdrawal. There's more to it. There's more nuance
It's a
to that.
coping strategy. It's a coping strategy that our young men and males are using to deal with the realities that it's very tough out here to be a black male. And one of the ways that you can deal with it is by creating a world and a space where you can be what you want to be and have the choices that you want to have, without having to incur the consequences that exist out here in this space for black males.
So how do you recommend parents support that child who may be engaging? And there are a variety of different types of coping mechanisms, right? So if you can talk to us a little bit about what some of those others may be, but then also, what do you tell parents who come in and say, well, my child is playing video games, my child is doing this? What do you kind of help them understand, or what do you do?
Sure. So I break down this concept of racial socialization. So one of the tasks that we have as black people raising black children is to develop and affirm a coherent sense of black identity. And there's two ways that we went about that at this point. The one is called the legacy approach. And essentially what this does is we just tell our sons and daughters that the world is tough for them, that they're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as much, that they should just expect to be beat down because of the color of their skin. But the challenge with that approach is that we don't tell our youth how to cope with those things. And so if I'm constantly told that things are going to be tough out here, I don't want to go outside if it's going to be tough like that. I want to be inside where I know I can control the space and the situation. So what I'll offer up to parents instead is to think about this ideal of the literacy approach. And what the literacy approach does is it equips our youth with the skills needed to address the racism and discrimination that exists out in the world. One of the reasons why our youth don't want to step out the door and address all of these messages that we're sharing with them is because they don't feel confident in their ability to address those things, and they don't feel centered in who they are as Black individuals. But what the literacy approach does is it helps them to accurately assess the challenges in a particular situation, to accurately assess their ability to do something about the situation, and then to be able to then evaluate that they've actually accomplished their goal in terms of effectively addressing the situation. And like that's a different paradigm, that's a paradigm shift to go from kind of offering these anecdotal statements about how tough it is for Black people out here to then be able to say, these are the skills that you can use to be able to address those situations. If our young folks felt more confident in their Blackness and then felt more confident in their ability to address assaults to their Blackness, then they're less likely to do the video games, or less likely to avoid those types of issues because they'll feel like they can do something about it.
Wow. That's powerful. And have you seen progress with that? Have you seen in terms of how kids navigate the social spaces they're in?
We've seen progress. Right now, we're in the process of creating the evidence, for testing our model of racial trauma treatment for the only racial trauma clinic here in the state of Kentucky. And part of what we do is we teach parents these skills that they then can teach their youth. And then oftentimes we teach the youth these skills as well. And we've seen positive aspects for that thus far.
Beautiful. Well, tell us what does the future for Dr. Kniffley look like? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are some things that you have on the horizon that you'd like to work on? Where should we look to see you in the future?
Sure. So you should look for me to be all over the country, educating clinicians about how we treat racial trauma in Black individuals, and really teaching folks the model that I've developed and that we're implementing. You should also look for me in the space of working with public defenders on how we can best communicate the narrative that many Black males are carrying with them as they navigate the criminal justice system, and how they can communicate that to judges and prosecutors in a way that can help them to understand better why it is that a Black male ended up in that space. Because I'm going all over the country offering those trainings to public defenders as well. So look for me in terms of developing this model and testing it, and then also being out there partnering with our public defenders to be able to best represent those Black males that have been trapped in the criminal justice system. Beautiful.
And very quickly, where can people find you online?
Sure. So the best place to find me is at my blog, drstephenniffleyjr.com. And it's just the Afrocentric psychologist, because I believe that we should always be African-centered as Black individuals.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the Onyx Report. And just a quick note to the people that contacted me about whether or not Dr. Kniffley holds classes on how to grow a beard. I don't think so. So you can stop writing me about that, because the brother's beard is just on point. So it is what it is. But thank you for being on the Onyx Report, and we appreciate it. Look out for us every first and third Wednesday of each month. So October 2nd, Wednesday, will be our next show, and I hope to hear from you then. But anyway, thanks for joining the Onyx Report. Peace.